The happiest day of her father's life turned into an unforgettable moment when Miriam stepped forward during the wedding ceremony and revealed a dark secret that shocked everyone in the room. Her revelation not only halted the wedding but also unraveled a chilling plot. What did Miriam know that no one else could see? How did her courage save her father's life and change their world forever? Stay tuned to uncover the full story. But before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if this story of bravery and truth resonates with you, be sure to subscribe so you never miss more inspiring stories like this. The town of Lakeshore had a way of making everything seem peaceful. Nestled between rolling hills and bordered by a tranquil lake, it was the kind of place people went to escape the world's noise. Its streets were lined with neat little houses, each with trimmed lawns and flower beds that seemed to bloom perfectly in every season. For Adam Malik, Lakeshore had become a haven, a place to heal after the sudden death of his wife, Sarah, 3 years earlier. It was where he had raised his daughter, Miriam, and where he had finally found a reason to smile again. Adam had been through more than most. Losing Sarah had torn him apart, and for a long time he had been a shell of the man he once was. The only thing that had kept him going was Miriam, who, at 7 years old, had been just as devastated by the loss of her mother. Together, they had learned how to navigate the world without her, relying on each other for strength. Now, 3 years later, things were different. Adam had met someone new, Layla Grant. She had come into his life unexpectedly, and though he had been hesitant at first, she won him over with her kindness and charm. Layla was everything Adam thought he would never find again: intelligent, beautiful, and caring. She had swept him off his feet, and before long, they were engaged to be married. For Adam, this was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild the family he had lost and give Miriam the stability and happiness she deserved. But as excited as Adam was for this new chapter in his life, Miriam wasn't as sure. At 10 years old, Miriam had always been an observant child, quiet, thoughtful, and careful in ways that most kids her age weren't. She had loved her mother deeply, and though she wanted her father to be happy, there was something about Layla that didn't sit right with her. It wasn't anything specific at first, just little things. A glance here, a cold comment there. Whenever Adam was around, Layla would shower Miriam with compliments, praising her for her good behavior and acting like the perfect future stepmother. But when Adam wasn't there, Layla's tone would change. She would become distant, impatient, as if Miriam were more of a nuisance than anything else. One evening, as Adam prepared dinner in the kitchen, Layla sat with Miriam in the living room, flipping through a bridal magazine. Layla had invited herself over, which wasn't unusual these days, and had made herself at home. Miriam sat curled up on the couch, her eyes on the TV, but she wasn't really watching. She was paying attention to Layla. "Miriam, darling," Layla said, her voice sugary sweet. "You'll make such a lovely flower girl at the wedding, won't you?" Miriam nodded but didn't look at her. "Yeah, I guess," she muttered. Layla's eyes flicked toward her, narrowing for a split second before the smile returned. "I know this is all a big change for you, but your father deserves to be happy, don't you think?" Miriam's stomach twisted. The way Layla said it made it sound like Miriam was the one standing in the way of her father's happiness. "I know," Miriam muttered. She hugged her knees closer to her chest, hoping the conversation would end. But Layla wasn't finished. "I'm sure we'll get along just fine," Layla added, her voice softer now, but there was an edge to it that made Miriam's skin crawl. "As long as you don't cause any trouble." Miriam finally looked up at her, feeling a coldness settle in her chest. Layla's smile was still there, but her eyes were hard. There was something about the way she looked at Miriam that made it clear Layla wasn't her friend. She wasn't here to be a mother figure, she was here for something else. Before Miriam could say anything, Adam walked into the room, carrying 2 plates of pasta. "Dinner's ready," he announced, oblivious to the tension that had filled the room just moments before. Layla's smile brightened immediately, and she stood up to meet him. "Wonderful, darling. You always make the best meals." Miriam watched as Layla wrapped her arms around Adam's waist and kissed him on the cheek. Adam beamed at her, clearly happy to have found love again. Miriam's heart ached at the sight of her father being so content, knowing that something about this wasn't right. As they sat down to eat, Layla chatted away, talking about wedding plans and guest lists. Adam was fully engaged in the conversation, But Miriam stayed quiet, pushing her food around her plate. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what exactly was bothering her so much about Layla. "Miriam, what do you think?" Adam's voice broke through her thoughts. "Huh." Miriam looked up, realizing that both Adam and Layla were staring at her, waiting for an answer. "About the wedding," Adam prompted. "Layla was just saying you'd look beautiful in a light blue dress for the ceremony." Miriam blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sure." "Whatever you think." Layla's smile returned, but Miriam could see the flicker of irritation behind her eyes. "Light blue it is then," she said smoothly. "We'll make sure you look perfect." Miriam didn't say anything else for the rest of the meal, her mind buzzing with unease. She didn't know what it was yet, but something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. Later that night, as Miriam lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that Layla wasn't who she appeared to be. Her father was so happy, happier than he had been in years, but Miriam couldn't help but wonder if Layla's intentions weren't as pure as they seemed. She thought about telling her dad how she felt, but every time she imagined the conversation, she stopped herself. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was just jealous or being overprotective? She couldn't bear the thought of disappointing him or causing him more pain. So Miriam decided to keep quiet at least for now. But in her heart, she knew she would have to keep an eye on Layla because sometimes what you saw on the surface wasn't the whole truth. And Miriam had a feeling there was a lot more to Layla than her father realized. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with activity. Layla busied herself with finalizing every last detail, and Adam was more than happy to let her take the lead. To him, everything seemed perfect. But to Miriam, the growing unease was impossible to ignore. Layla's presence in their home had become more frequent, and while Adam remained oblivious to the shift in atmosphere, Miriam felt it in every room Layla entered. The more time they spent together, the more Miriam noticed how different Layla was when her father wasn't around. One evening after school, Miriam sat at the kitchen table, pretending to focus on her homework, while Layla chatted on the phone in the next room. The sound of her laughter drifted in, light and sugary when she spoke to Adam or others. But now, in a more private conversation, it was low and cold. Miriam couldn't make out the words, but the tone alone was enough to make her ears perk up. She glanced toward the doorway, heart pounding. Should she get closer? What if Layla noticed? Curiosity got the better of her. Miriam quietly stood up and tiptoed down the hallway, making sure her footsteps were soft on the wooden floor. She paused just outside the living room, where Layla sat on the couch, the phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and serious. "Yeah, it's all going according to plan," Layla said, her words sharp and unlike the sweet voice she used around Adam. "I'll get him to sign the papers after the wedding, and then it's just a matter of time." Miriam's heart thudded in her chest. What was she talking about? She stayed perfectly still, her back pressed against the wall, listening as carefully as she could. "Of course, the life insurance policy is locked in," Layla continued. "Once he's gone, we'll split the payout just like we agreed." Miriam's breath caught in her throat. Was she hearing this right? Was Layla talking about her dad? "I'll handle it," Layla said firmly, a chill in her voice. "James, you just make sure you're ready when I give the signal." Miriam didn't recognize the name, but it sent a shiver down her spine. She had heard enough. This wasn't just Layla being rude or cold, this was something far worse. Suddenly, Layla stood up, and Miriam scrambled back down the hall, trying to stay out of sight. She rushed back to the kitchen, her heart racing as she slid back into her chair, her eyes fixed on her homework. Her hands trembled as she picked up her pencil, pretending she hadn't heard anything. A few moments later, Layla entered the room, all smiles once again. "Miriam, darling, how's your homework coming along?" "Fine," Miriam mumbled, not looking up. Layla walked over and gently placed a hand on Miriam's shoulder. "You know, after the wedding, we're going to have such a wonderful life together. You, me, and your father. Doesn't that sound nice?" Miriam stiffened, her mind replaying Layla's words about the life insurance. The thought of her father being in danger twisted in her stomach like a knot. She wanted to pull away from Layla's touch, but instead, she nodded silently, too afraid to give herself away. "That's a good girl," Layla cooed, her smile never faltering. "We'll be one happy family." Miriam waited until Layla left the room before she allowed herself to breathe again. Her heart raced, her mind spinning with fear. She didn't know exactly what Layla was planning, but it was clear that her father's life was at stake. And the worst part was she didn't know if anyone would believe her. Who could she even tell? Her father adored Layla and was completely wrapped up in the wedding plans. He'd never believe that the woman he was about to marry was plotting to kill him. And as for anyone else, they'd probably think she was just being a jealous kid who didn't want a stepmother. Miriam felt trapped. She had no idea what to do. The only thing she knew for sure was that she couldn't let this wedding happen. She had to find a way to stop Layla before it was too late. The following morning, Miriam woke up with the same heavy feeling in her chest. She hadn't slept much the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of Layla's sinister plot. She had spent hours lying awake, trying to figure out how to tell her father. But every time she imagined the conversation, her stomach twisted with fear. How could she explain what she had overheard without sounding like she was making it all up? At breakfast, Adam was in his usual cheerful mood, talking about wedding plans as he poured himself a cup of coffee. Miriam sat across from him, barely touching her cereal. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. "Miriam?" Adam looked at her, his brow furrowed in concern. "You're awfully quiet this morning. Everything okay?" Miriam looked up at him, her heart pounding. This was her chance. She could tell him everything right now. But when she opened her mouth to speak, the fear swallowed her words. "I'm fine," Miriam muttered, staring down at her cereal. Adam didn't press her, though he could see the worry in her eyes. "You sure? You've been a little off lately. If something's bothering you, you can talk to me." Miriam's chest tightened. She wanted nothing more than to talk to her father, to tell him the truth. But the thought of Layla's cold smile made her hesitate once again. "I'm okay, Dad," she said quietly. "Just tired." Adam smiled gently, though he still looked concerned. "All right, but if anything's on your mind, you know you can always come to me." Miriam nodded, but inside, she felt more alone than ever. How could she come to him when the truth was so terrifying? How could she explain that the woman he was planning to marry was plotting his death? She pushed her bowl away, no longer hungry. She had to do something, but she had no idea where to start. For now, all she could do was watch and wait, hoping she would find the courage to act before it was too late. The days passed in a blur of wedding preparations, each one making Miriam feel more helpless and trapped. The invitations had been sent out, the venue booked, and the dress picked. Her father's excitement grew with each passing day, but all Miriam could think about was the conversation she had overheard. Every time she saw Layla, her stomach turned with fear. How could her father not see it? How could he be so blind? Layla's presence in their home had become almost constant. She floated around the house with a smile on her face, talking about flowers, menus, and guest lists, all while Adam hung on her every word. But whenever Miriam caught Layla's eye, she saw the truth lurking behind that perfect smile. A coldness that was meant only for her. One evening, a week before the wedding, Miriam sat alone in her room, clutching her stuffed bear, a gift from her mother when she was still alive. It was old and worn, but it brought her comfort in times like this when she felt like the world was closing in on her. Her mind raced, filled with all the horrible possibilities of what might happen if the wedding went forward. If she didn't do something, she might lose her father forever. She had to tell someone. But who? She had already convinced herself that her father wouldn't believe her. He was too in love, too trusting. Maybe she could talk to one of her teachers or even a friend's parent. But they might just dismiss her as a kid who was having trouble accepting a new stepmother. No one would take her seriously. As she sat there, her heart heavy with fear, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her door creaked open, and she looked up to see her father standing there, smiling softly at her. "Hey, sweetheart," Adam said as he stepped into the room. "You've been spending a lot of time up here lately. Everything okay?" Miriam forced a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Dad." Adam sat down on the edge of her bed, his expression gentle but concerned. "You know, you don't have to say you're fine if you're not. I know there's been a lot of changes lately. It's okay to feel a little overwhelmed." Miriam's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. This was her chance to tell him the truth. But as she looked into his kind, trusting eyes, the fear crept back in. How could she destroy his happiness like this? What if she was wrong? What if Layla wasn't really going to go through with it? "I just miss Mom," Miriam whispered, hugging her bear tighter. Adam's expression softened, and he reached out to gently stroke her hair. "I know, sweetie. I miss her too, every day." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared grief hanging in the air. Miriam wanted to tell him, but the words wouldn't come. "I think you'll like the wedding," Adam said softly. "It'll be a beautiful day. And I know it's not the same as when your mom was here, but I really believe that Layla is going to make us happy." Miriam's stomach twisted at the mention of Layla's name, but she said nothing. She couldn't bring herself to break his heart, not like this. Adam smiled at her again before standing up. "Get some rest, okay? Big day coming up." As he left the room, closing the door gently behind him, Miriam felt the tears well up in her eyes. She was running out of time. The wedding was only a week away, and she still hadn't done anything to stop it. She felt like she was drowning, caught between the truth she knew and the fear that no one would believe her. The next few days were a blur of activity. Layla was everywhere, making phone calls, finalizing the guest list, and making sure every detail of the wedding was perfect. She played the role of the doting fiancée flawlessly, and Adam was too swept up in it all to notice the cold glances she shot Miriam when he wasn't looking. One afternoon, as Miriam sat at the kitchen table pretending to work on a school project, she overheard Layla talking on the phone again, this time in the living room. Her voice was low, but Miriam could just make out what she was saying. "Everything's set for the wedding," Layla said in a hushed tone. "I'll make sure he signs the papers, and then we'll move forward as planned." Miriam's heart raced. It was happening. Layla was really going to go through with it. She had no choice now. She had to stop this wedding no matter what. That night, as she lay in bed, Miriam thought about all the ways she could expose Layla. She could try to gather proof, maybe record one of her conversations or catch her in the act. But how? Layla was always so careful around her, never letting her guard down completely. Then an idea came to her, one that made her stomach turn with fear. What if she spoke up during the wedding in front of everyone? Her dad, the guests, the minister. They'd all be there. If she could make everyone hear the truth at once, Layla wouldn't be able to brush it off so easily. But the thought terrified her. Interrupting the wedding in front of all those people? What if no one believed her? What if Layla found a way to turn everyone against her? Miriam closed her eyes, trying to push the fear away. She didn't have any other options. She had to be brave, for her father's sake. The day of the wedding arrived, and the house buzzed with energy. Guests began to arrive, filling the space with excited chatter. Miriam stood in her bedroom, staring at herself in the mirror. She wore the light blue dress Layla had picked out for her, and though it was beautiful, she felt like she was suffocating in it. Her stomach churned with nerves, but she knew what she had to do. Layla had been too busy with last-minute details to pay much attention to Miriam, and for that, Miriam was grateful. She needed to stay calm, to gather her courage. This was her last chance to stop the wedding, to save her father from the woman who had fooled him so completely. As the ceremony began, Miriam's heart pounded in her chest. She stood beside her father, who looked happier than she had seen him in years. Layla was radiant in her wedding gown, her smile dazzling as she stood at the altar. But Miriam knew the truth beneath that smile. She knew what Layla was planning. When the minister began to speak, Miriam's hands trembled, her mouth dry, her throat tight with fear. She had to do this, she had to stop it. And then, as the minister asked if anyone had any objections, Miriam felt a surge of courage. "I do," she whispered, her voice shaking. All eyes turned to her. Miriam stood frozen, her heart pounding as the weight of every gaze in the room bore down on her. She could feel her father's confusion, the questioning looks from the guests, and the sudden cold stare from Layla. This was it, and there was no going back now. Adam turned toward his daughter, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Miriam, what's going on?" Miriam's throat tightened. The words felt trapped, but she knew she had to get them out. She had to tell the truth, no matter how scared she was. I can't let this wedding happen," Miriam said, her voice barely above a whisper. She took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage she had left. "Layla isn't who you think she is. She's planning to hurt you, Dad." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd of guests. Adam's face turned pale as he looked between Miriam and Layla. "Miriam, what are you talking about?" Adam asked, his voice shaky. Layla's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure, stepping forward with an air of concern. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Why would you say something like that?" Miriam shook her head, stepping back from Layla's approach. "I heard you talking on the phone," Miriam said, her voice steadier now, the fear giving way to determination. "You're planning to kill him after the wedding, you and a man named James. You're going to take his life insurance money." Gasps filled the room as the guests turned toward Layla, their eyes wide with shock. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the entire room was frozen in time, waiting for what would happen next. Layla's face twisted into something between shock and amusement, but there was a flicker of panic in her eyes. She let out a laugh, though it was hollow. "Oh, Miriam, that's ridiculous. Where would you get an idea like that?" But Miriam didn't back down. "I heard you. I heard everything. You were on the phone with James, and you said you were going to make sure Dad signed the papers so you could get the money. I know what you're doing." Adam, still in disbelief, turned to Layla, searching her face for an explanation. "Layla, is this true? Tell me this isn't true." Layla's eyes flashed, and for the briefest of moments, the mask slipped. The sweetness drained from her expression, and what was left behind was something cold and calculating. But it was only for a second. She quickly recovered, stepping toward Adam with a look of wounded innocence. "Of course it's not true," Layla said, her voice rising in frustration. "Adam, you know me. You know I love you. It's just Miriam having a hard time adjusting to the idea of us getting married. She's confused. She's still grieving her mother, and she's scared of losing you. That's all this is." Adam looked at his daughter, his face torn. He wanted to believe Layla. He had to believe her. But there was something in Miriam's eyes that made him hesitate. His daughter was frightened, yes, but she wasn't confused. There was a certainty in her voice, a conviction that shook him to his core. "Dad, please," Miriam pleaded, stepping closer to him. "I wouldn't make this up. I love you. I'm trying to protect you." Layla's eyes narrowed, and the warmth in her voice evaporated. "Adam, this is absurd. You're not going to listen to the wild imagination of a 10-year-old, are you?" But the way she said it, the sharpness of her tone, the edge of impatience, sent a chill down Adam's spine. For the first time, he began to doubt everything. He looked at Layla again, really looked at her, and for the first time since they met, he saw the cracks in her perfect exterior. He saw the coldness that Miriam had seen all along. "Miriam," Adam said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you sure about this?" Miriam nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm sure, Dad. I heard everything." "She's lying." A tense silence fell over the room as Adam turned back to Layla, his heart pounding in his chest. "Layla, is this true?" Layla's face twisted with fury. The sweetness, the charm, the concern, all of it vanished in an instant. She glared at Adam, her voice venomous. "You're really going to take her word over mine? After everything I've done for you?" Adam took a step back, the truth hitting him like a punch to the gut. It was all a lie, everything. The love, the promises, the future they had planned, it had all been a facade. And now, standing in front of him, was a woman who had been willing to take his life for money. "You lied to me," Adam whispered, his voice shaking with disbelief. "All of it, it was a lie." Layla's lips curled into a sneer, her eyes dark with contempt. "You're a fool, Adam. You think I ever cared about you? You were just a means to an end. The life insurance payout. That's all I needed from you." The guests were frozen in shock, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Miriam stood beside her father, her small hand gripping his tightly. She had done it. She had exposed the truth. And now, the mask was fully off. Before anyone could move, the doors of the venue burst open, and 2 police officers entered, flanked by James, the man Layla had been conspiring with. James looked pale, clearly having been caught in the act. "It's over, Layla," one of the officers said, stepping forward. "We have enough evidence to arrest you." Layla's face twisted with rage as the officers moved toward her. She thrashed against them as they placed her in handcuffs, her voice shrill and filled with fury. "You'll regret this, Adam. You'll regret ever trusting her." Adam didn't respond. He couldn't. His heart was too heavy with the weight of the betrayal. He watched in silence as the woman he had once loved was escorted out of the room in handcuffs, her life unraveling before his eyes. For a moment, the room remained silent, the guests too stunned to speak. Then, slowly, Adam turned to Miriam, his face etched with pain and gratitude. "You saved me," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "You saved my life." Miriam buried her face in his chest, the relief washing over her like a wave. She had been so afraid that no one would believe her, afraid that her father would be lost forever. But now, as her father held her close, she knew that everything would be okay. "I love you, Dad," Miriam whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I love you too," Adam said, his voice breaking. "And I'll never doubt you again." As they stood there, surrounded by the whispers and the stunned expressions of the guests, Adam realized just how close he had come to losing everything. And he knew, without a doubt, that it was his daughter's bravery that had saved him. This story teaches us that bravery can come from the most unexpected places and that speaking the truth, even when it seems impossible, can change everything. Miriam's courage to stand up for her father in the face of fear reminds us that we must trust our instincts, especially when the stakes are high. Her persistence in exposing the danger, despite her doubts, saved her father and showed the power of family bonds and love. The lesson here is clear. When we stand up for the people we love and for what's right, even in difficult circumstances, we can make a profound difference. If this story inspired you, remember that standing up for truth and protecting those we care about is a message we all need to carry in our hearts. Don't forget to subscribe to stay connected with more heartwarming and powerful stories like this one. Your support helps us share these important lessons with the world. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.